In a 1982 article in the American Historical Review, Gilbert Allardyce bemoaned the disappearance of mandatory study of Western civilization and pointed to the liberalization of college curricula in the 1960s as a culprit. Almost 40 years later, the relevance of the study of Western civilization is not only in question, but perceived as possibly racist, ethnocentric, and a symptom of an amorphous and ever-changing notion called white supremacy. While the idea of Western civilization is derided as a remnant of the past, no other meaningful course of study has taken its place. A populace fully ignorant of the origin of the civilization that gave the world the rule of law, democratic structures, technological and economic success, and the freedom to pursue rational thought, allows academics and students the ability to place race, culture, economic, and social class at the forefront, and to reduce our civilization to what Robert Royle calls an organized conspiracy of white men engaged in protecting their own interests. The virtues of Western civilization clearly outweigh its weaknesses and failures. First, however, we must define in our own minds what the West, or Western civilization, is. Do we speak of Europe and its offshoots in North and South America? Or is Western civilization more clearly defined by language and the growth of self-governing institutions that limit the power of the state and enhance the freedom of the individual? As Daniel Hannan attests in Inventing Freedom, the core of Western civilization rests in the idea of freedom and finds its clearest expression in the development of the rule of law, personal liberty, and representative government in the English-speaking nations, what he calls the Anglosphere. Historians must also examine how we define freedom. Alexander Rosenthal-Pobuhl points out the difference between the ancient world's notion of freedom, that of Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, versus the Hobbesian modern view. The ancient world viewed freedom as only attainable through regulating man's passions, while Rosenthal-Pobuhl notes that the modern view of freedom, one without external constraints, can devolve into licentiousness and sin. He cites the letter of St. Paul to the Romans to highlight this struggle as, quote, the absence of freedom as enslavement to those self-centered passions and desires that obstruct the only worthy freedom of man, the freedom that leads to moral rectitude. The concept of Western civilization needs to be taught and examined not through the narrow confines of racial injustice, although there's been plenty of it, or attempted genocide of indigenous peoples, or through the inequities brought about by capitalism and accumulated wealth. If Western civilization has its weaknesses, its strengths, as Hannan notes, are imitated and spread throughout the world, from the constitutions of Asian democracies to the rejection of theocratic forces in the Islamic world, to the rejection of authoritarian and totalitarian regimes. Western civilization is adopted and mimicked and adapted. While African and Asian studies are vital, an Afrocentric or Asian-centric view that denigrates the West due to the sins of the past is not a meaningful or illuminating alternative. Royle warns of an errant pedagogy that has arisen that makes the ignorant passions of the student the measure of what should and should not be learned. This we must avoid. Western civilization is relevant, and I look forward to learning about the development of man's freedoms during the course of this semester. Thank you.